Good day everyone, so hope you're all doing really well. In today's video we'll talk about the state of Genshin Impact in 2026. Now since this is going to be a bit of a longer video, you're welcome to listen in only to the audio, or if you want to watch me do some random things with the characters here in the background, you're also more than welcome to do so. Alright, let's get into our topic. So Genshin Impact currently is in a very good state when it comes to monetization, alternative gameplay modes, etc. But to really appreciate where we are currently, let's talk about the history, because there's a lot of nuance that we kind of need to flesh out. When Genshin launched in 2020, this was obviously a very difficult time. It was COVID, people were locked in, and especially a lot of people that were new to content creation in the gacha space got a massive boost from playing Genshin Impact. Now, naturally, because Genshin started off in its early days, we didn't have the breadth of content that we have today. So this basically means that a lot of people that kind of got very famous online for their different guides and approaches and different ways of telling you the same thing that other people are telling you with just a bit of a slight twist, a lot of these people were takers rather than givers. In other words, Hoyo created the content and we basically had to make content out of it. So a lot of repetitiveness comes along, and eventually in 2021 there were lots of big calls for, this multi-billion-dollar company to just get off their ass and give us more in-game content. And a lot of those criticisms are valid, but I also feel like a lot of those criticisms at the time were from content creators that just really wanted a couple of different ways to drive more engagement, line their pocket, because things do get stale after a year. I mean, it's not that easy just to have the same player base, the same audience for an entire year. People do move on, etc., especially since the lockdowns were starting to lift up and so on. So you can definitely tell that from the beginning, yes, Genshin had a lot of fame, it had a lot of notoriety in terms of how it gained global popularity, but at the same time it wasn't equipped at the time to expand as quickly or to give us the content that we desire. And this obviously led to the concept of there potentially coming a Genshin killer. In other words, it was widely anticipated that if a company brings out a similar-ish type of game, and this is something that you saw with Hovering Waves, that was also open world gacha, but that improved on everything Genshin or all the pain points that we've had with Genshin, that this would be the definite Genshin killer and Genshin would just go away, etc. It made for some fancy clickbait titles. But as myself and other commenters at the time pointed out, Genshin Impact got a lot of people through a difficult time. It's not just a sunk cost fallacy type of game. There's a lot more sentimental value to this game. So what would most likely happen is that those that are genuinely dissatisfied with the game would go, and other people would just stay along, see the game for what it is, occasionally log in. So it would be a slow bleed, if you will, of players, and also a resurgence of more and more new players coming in, because Genshin did one thing really, really well. They optimized for mobile, and that is currently, even till today in 2026, one of their biggest strengths. Is just how well this game can run on so many different devices. And that, I think, is really testament to how this game got such a very, very strong IP. If I can give it one big criticism, is that when they announced the Genshin anime, they should have just released 12 episodes. And then periodically, every 6 months or 12 months, release another 12 episodes. Because I think they're kind of playing into the trap of wanting to have this big franchise that they want to just push all at once. But I think it would have been better to just release it slowly over time. That's just my kind of personal opinion. But regardless, so Genshin had a lot of criticisms, and as the world started opening up, COVID, lockdowns lifted, more and more companies started building games. Even Hoyo themselves released Honkai Star Rail, which was ironically enough seen to be the Genshin killer from Hoyo themselves, because they obviously improved on all the pain points of Genshin. And Hoyo knew what they were doing. They knew that their audience were hungry for something new, and that's why a lot of people kind of played into, okay, you've got Genshin and Honkai Star Rail, and you could tell content creators were just eating it up, and Hoyo absolutely played everyone with regards to pivoting a game that's ultimately just pretty much low value. I'm sorry, Honkai Star Rail is not as much value for your money as Genshin is, and people can fight me on it, but I'm going to stick by it. Anyhow, so as Genshin obviously starts improving, it starts adding quality of life, a lot of new games come out. You have games that are also improving, they're taking the same type of gacha model, and ultimately this then starts giving a bit of an existential crisis to Genshin, because if you get games that just have flashier graphics or deliver on the pain points that Genshin couldn't deliver, because Genshin's got like this huge legacy system that they have and they can't innovate as much as like a new game that's built on a fresh Unreal 5 engine, etc. What do you do as a company? And I think this is where Genshin started pivoting in a very, very strategic way. So rather than just going through the usual cycles of releasing another Shnezhnaya or another region, they strategically pivoted not Cry or pushed it like in the middle of the storyline so that they can start branching out with Genshin as a proper platform. So what do I mean by this is that rather than having your game compete with different games, Genshin in of itself becomes a platform where content creators are not just given content to monetize off of, but also now can create content themselves using the platform. So this is very much like if you think of, I think the ecosystem that Epic built for their platform, where you can basically use their game builder, and if your game becomes very successful, you can publish the game and then basically share in some of the profits once it's been monetized and reaches a certain level. That is the entire idea with Genshin. It's obviously kind of still early days with the whole Miliastra sandbox, but you can certainly tell that the Unreal Engine that they spent so much money on is now going to be used much more strategically. And this is something that Wuthering Waves and Kuro doesn't have. It's something that Bluepock doesn't have, and all the other gacha companies, a lot of them don't have this, and I do stand corrected, but the extent and the promise of the Miliastra sandbox is just very, very interesting. And it also gives Hoyo another angle to monetize, because now you can monetize for cosmetics instead of just the raw combat, because Genshin was always about the combat in and of itself. So what they've done is, for professionals that want to play Stygian Onslaught and the most difficult content, you can do so. For casuals that just want to have a very, very good time and not worry about the end-game content, they've got different levels, different modes, and you don't need to be tied down to feeling, hey, you know, I'm not a Genshin player if I can't pull off a certain Fury crafting optimal Mavuika melt combo. It's like you don't need any of that. You can play the game casually, and that is just so huge. I think people, including myself, really underestimated how powerful the longevity of the Miliastra environment is for Genshin. I do feel, however, that the transition and the inclusion of Miliastra Wonderland could have been done better. That's my only criticism. I think Genshin in of themselves got anxious and they kind of rushed it in terms of its integration with the existing lore and so on. I mean, even the cutscene is just like the cutscene of itself is just such a non-starter. You can tell this was just a very, very quick add-on. And I think they should have learned this from when they released the TCG. In theory, the TCG in of itself, despite me being one of the most vocal critics against it, is actually a good idea, but the way you incorporate it into the game, that's kind of like the big contention with it. And I think that's also the same that I want to say with the Miliastra system in of itself. It presupposes that you first have to go through Genshin to get to it, and ultimately that might be a very big weakness of the platform. And if anything, I probably am going to make the guess that if this doesn't pivot out, then Genshin will probably find that the Miliastra experiment is going to become very, very costly. And what I mean by costly is not just in terms of the server cost and the resources and so on, but also the opportunity cost on getting new players in. Because this is the thing, when you create new gacha games, you've got to have an easy onboarding experience. And fundamentally, the old Mondstadt gameplay and so on is just very, very old. It's not as streamlined as some of the newer titles, which just throws you into a bit of action, gets you a bit of excitement, etc. So I feel like the onboarding experience needs to significantly improve, or at least have like a massive rework. I'm still of the opinion that if they can decouple TCG and they can decouple Miliastra Miliastra Wonderland in some sort of fashion, then the game in of itself can be, or at least the Genshin IP in of itself can then have an ability to start growing. The other thing that I also foresee as a bit of a problem for Genshin is that a lot of their IP is currently very digital. Yes, I know you have the Genshin shop and all of that, but just think of Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And some of the other TCG type of games. There's physical cards, there's lots of physical merchandise, and I feel this has been one of the areas that Genshin hasn't really been that strong in for me, if I can be real honest. So for them to build out their brand, it needs to feel like more than like you're just collecting a lot of digital junk. It must be something that you can collect, because one of the things that I've seen is that because of the lack of official merchandise, you have a very big secondary market where people are doing or creating like their own copyright infringed like statues for different characters. People, like with regards to skin, they play with mods and they try and monetize that in and of itself. And even some modders go as far as modding the Miliastra skins on top of characters, which I think personally is, morally at least, is a very kind of scummy thing to do. But I mean, we can talk about that in another video. But yeah, we're definitely in a place where there is a big secondary market for art and so on. And Genshin's not really given us a platform or a way or an official way to like tap into these markets. We have to tap into those markets by our own accord. Now, obviously, there are some pros and cons to all of that and so on. I can completely understand. But my broader point is that for the ambitiousness of Genshin to being a household name, there are a lot of things that I feel like they could have done instead. So now I'm sounding like what I said in the beginning, you know, where we complained about Endgame and all these things in the past. Now I'm complaining about them not properly treating their IP, and that potentially in the future it's just going to be an even slower bleed of players as they pivot towards other games and other offerings. And it takes just one competitor, and even by chance, even if the competitor is not as good or as mature, to uproot a game like Genshin. So we'll definitely see where things are going to go. But I do see that with the current system, Genshin is in a comfy spot, but I don't know how long this comfiness is going to last. Alright, so with everything being said so far, let's talk a bit about now properly the full state of Genshin Impact for different player groups. For the casuals, you have a game with a ton of story, a lot of entertainment value, especially if you're starting the game new. Although you're going to find yourself a bit like kind of hard-strung to really catch up, because there's just so much digital junk that you have not accumulated over the years. And even if someone pays right now, I mean, the amount of progress even a free-to-play player has made compared to someone just dropping even $10,000, I mean, there's still like a very, very huge gap in that regard. As for people that play the game more seriously and professionally, you obviously now have two routes to monetization. You can keep the old traditional formula of taking the content that is given to you, in particular things like the Stygian Onslaught, like the higher difficulty modes, the combat side of the game, and then make content and strategies off of that. As I think the diversity and expansion of the character rosters, the different gameplay mechanics that the different teams have and that the different bosses have certainly gives us a lot of like content to chew on. So we can definitely like spend more and more time, like we now have like a proper end game to really spend time figuring out stuff and then presenting that to people that are of a similar mind. And as we've talked throughout this video, for the people that are not that interested in the formal combat side, you just have a complete like sandbox to do whatever you want. So there's an alternative monetization strategy. And also do not forget things like the teapot. You can still create like beautiful teapots, and I've even seen people that do teapot commissions for other people as well. So that's like very, very interesting and such. And then obviously for people that are interested in the secondary markets, you can still like create custom mods and skins, although those aren't officially sanctioned. And then there are some more shady things like paying someone else to play on your account and so on, but I'm not going to go into any of that. But at least what we can say is that there is content in Genshin Impact. It might not always be the most interesting content, it might not always be the most deeply well written, thought-provoking content like you would get in Reverse 1999. It might not have, you know, some very, very classics like the Honkai Impact 3rd, Mei, Kiana, Bronya, some of those character dynamics, but hey, for what it is, Genshin is a cultural sensation, and I do think that despite the fact that there are more gacha games, it certainly has a huge first mover's advantage, especially with regards to their IP, and I think ultimately that's why you don't get a Genshin killer. You just get Genshin either bleeding and then slowly filling up, and then bleeding and slowly filling up, and I don't think that is going to change much. But at least for people that are still with us, that are still playing Genshin, you're in a good spot. If we have to look at this honestly and realistically, you're in a good spot. The game's in a good spot. So I think it's become more expensive. We've spoken about that in the past video with the K-shaped economy, but other than that, in terms of entertainment value, it is there, although I would personally caution you to not make Genshin the only thing that you play. Having a couple of other alternatives and even rotating and not playing Genshin for a month or two and then coming back, in my opinion, that's kind of the more optimal way to do it, because then you're not going to burn yourself out on just playing the same thing over and over and over, because what will then happen is you see improvements incrementally, and that kind of burns you out. But if you wait for content and you have a lot of content, bam, dropped on your doorstep, you chew through it, you put it away, you come back, bam, you have your next meal. That's kind of like how you should play it, rather than just constantly chewing on it. That's my personal opinion. But alright guys, that's been a hell of a long video. Thank you so much for watching, and let me know what your comments are below. If you think my assessments are wrong, or you've got some very cool insight, let me know. I'm always interested to hear different opinions, because I might see things from my perspective, but I certainly don't always have the full picture, if you will. Alright, keep well, cheers.